Well, good morning to each of you. Welcome you here this morning. Hope that everyone feels welcome. I want to open the message this morning by reading two passages that are going to be my text. The first one is found in 1 Peter chapter 3. If you'll turn there. 1 Peter chapter 3 with verse 1. Likewise, you wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may, without the word, be won by the conversation of the wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear, whose adorning let it not be that outward adorning of plaiting the hair, wearing of gold, or putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, in that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. For after this manner, in the old time, the holy women also, who trusted in God, adorned themselves, being in subjection even unto their own husbands, even as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, as long as you do well and are not afraid with any amazement. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. And a almost parallel passage in 1 Timothy chapter 2. Just 3 verses here. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 8. I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. In like manner also, that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair or gold or pearls or costly array, but which becoming women professing godliness with good works. And I'll stop there. You're very familiar with both of these passages, and I'm going to be pulling from both of them this morning. It's used many times. There's many topics that can be addressed out of those two passages. But I'd like to look at it this morning for direction and relating to principles of modesty and Christian character. Some would say that dress is a Mennonite preacher's favorite subject. I don't feel that way. In some ways, if we as a church compare ourselves to society around us, we can very quickly feel pretty comfortable right where we are in regards to modesty. So why would we talk about it at all? Why would we speak to it? Well, we know that modesty and immodesty has some pressures behind of it that are based in our psychological and spiritual makeup. The natural human desires to be noticed and to be attractive. And those desires affect almost everyone. As a Christian, we've been given some principles in Scripture that have a bearing on how we present our bodies. But it would seem that in general, that society has kind of completely lost those basic principles of modesty. And short of a national spiritual revival, that's probably not going to change. I commented to Sonia a while back that I think this is the year that it seems acceptable for a lady to appear in public in shorts that are so tight and thin that it looks like they forgot pants. I was already thinking about this message and I'm looking at these passages, and I had a husband and a wife come to the nursery on Friday, or this week sometime, and the wife was dressed exactly like that. Now, it makes me uncomfortable. If you're out in public, you can just look the other way, avert your eyes, but when you're strolling around a field with them for an hour, It's just not that easy. And it's a very kind of uncomfortable situation. I remembered something that I witnessed earlier this year at a 7-Eleven. Two young girls come in, and I don't know, they may be dressed to go swimming. I don't know, but as they made their transaction at the counter right beside of me, the Middle Eastern man behind the counter, when he finished, he leaned across the counter. He said, "The next time you ladies come in, could you have something on more appropriate?" And that's one of the first times I ever heard somebody say something that bold about dress that wasn't obviously of a Christian background, but it was offensive to him, and he said something about it. Society has normalized this. Nudity and exposure of the body, there's almost no rules. How a lady dresses is almost completely up to her. To speak to it in any way is like attacking her rights, her self-expression, her femininity. And if you make comment or if they sense disapproval, it can quickly get turned around until, as a man, you're a creep or a pervert. So that's one side of society that we witness. The other side, I'll illustrate with this story. I built a fence for a lady in D.C. earlier this year, which is quite a bit out of character or out of our line of work, but I was originally just going to be planting trees. This designer had kind of given her a kind of complete landscape makeover, if you will. But in the end, he asked if I would consider doing the whole package. Long story short, I agreed to do that, and it would become much more complicated than I had anticipated and took longer, but it came out and pretty well. I was pleased with it. The fence kind of came as pre-built panels and from a manufacturer in New England states, and we just assembled that package. Anyway, the customer, the lady, worked directly with this manufacturer in getting what she wanted, ordering what she wanted, and drawings back and forth, and the contract of manufacturing was all done between her and this manufacturer. They never met, they just exchanged back and forth on the phone and by email. I had to call that owner a few times to get some help as we were assembling this. But at the very end of the project, the lady wanted something added on that was not part of the original design, and I offered to call up there and just with the measurements, just tell him what we needed and just get it ordered. So the man asked me about how that project went, and I told him it went very well. I actually kind of enjoyed it once I got it kind of figured out. I said it really helped that she was one of the nicest people I've ever worked for. I said she never gave me any problem. She never bothered me at all. She was just generous. She was kind. She would leave for the day and come out and just drop her house keys on the picnic table and tell me to lock up when I was finished, if I needed to use the restroom or anything. So I was describing this to this man, and he interrupted me mid-sentence. He said, "Was she attractive?" And I didn't say yes or no to that. It just kind of ignored it. I guess it's possible to ask that question innocently. But I think what he really wanted was some crude answer describing her looks, because he had never met her in person. And I don't know if he felt ripped off by that or what, but he wanted me to fill in any missing parts. Truthfully, she was somewhat attractive, but she never dressed that way or acted in any way that led me to believe that she was trying to get my attention. She wasn't that type of person. Actually, she was very reserved. The way she handled herself, her mannerisms, and the people skills that she interacted with me with is what kind of stuck with me. So that's kind of the two sides of the modesty issue between men and women. Women who will dress or undress in almost any fashion to get noticed, and men who appreciate that and enjoy it and focus on that more than her character. So the title of my message this morning is in the form of a question. Is she attractive? I want the focus of the message to be about the attractiveness of a Christian woman's inner character and the way that she presents herself in modesty. And Christian men that have hearts and minds that have been transformed and appreciate those inner qualities, those inner characters of our sisters, and encourage biblical applications of modesty. The biblical principles of modesty have to be our guidance because we simply can't be a little bit more covered or a little bit more modest than society around us, or we're very quickly going to be in the same trap as they are. It has to be something that begins in the heart and with meaningful applications. Actually, even most mainstream churches have moved away from scriptural principles on modesty, simply because they're moving with society, maybe slower, and Scripture does not spell out every detail about what modesty means and the applications for it. Modesty becomes a bit subjective. And I'm not contradicting what I said about society normalizing indecency, but sometimes I wonder if they are intentionally seeking attention, or if it's just a society that's slowly moving away from God, moving away from godly principles and application, and they're just doing what feels good, just wearing what's comfortable, just no regard to the impact that it has on other people. Romans chapter 1 speaks to this in 2 verses. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts. So just eventually, it's just ignorance, justifiable in their minds, and it becomes normal. Christian men have to apply biblical principles of modesty, crucify the desires of lust and imagination in their own hearts and minds. And I believe that as men, if we don't have a sincere appreciation for modesty and desire to see our wives and daughters and sisters upholding biblical principles and application, and we don't detest the indecency of culture, then we're going to be undermining the whole principle. We need to be concerned about the issue and make meaningful applications together, as men and women, as a church, or these principles will get lost. So what are those biblical principles? In that chapter we read in 1 Peter, he starts out there with the wives being subject to their own husbands. And so the thought of being under authority. Peter refers to that principle in several ways, and you also see it in 1 Timothy chapter 2. He uses the word subjection. Other versions would use the word submission. Submission to her husband, we could say submission to God's authority structure. Applies not only to wives, but also to young ladies. It applies to men. Peter says that a woman's humility and submission to her husband can be a means that the husband is won without word or without the verbal teaching and preaching, just by observance of their wife's humility, wife's obedience, wife's surrender. What does won mean? That the husband can be won. Well, to win them to Christ. And what's the prize? Well, the prize is that the husband also comes under the lordship of Jesus Christ. He finds himself humbled. He finds himself surrendered to his authority, which is Christ. And verses 5 and 6 repeat this thought of submission to authority using the example of Sarah and Abraham. The New Living Translation says like this for verse 5, "This is how the holy women of old made themselves beautiful. They put their trust in God and accepted the authority of their husbands." and they were beautiful. 1 Corinthians 11 would bear this out, that women being in subjection or being under authority, and men being under the authority of Christ. Both of those things speak to a level of humility that's necessary if it's going to be exemplified in modesty. And that in the thought of modesty there being modesty of the heart, beginning in the heart. It's one of the character qualities that's to be in every heart, not just in women or wives. Men are to be humble and under submission as well. That's a call to all Christians in every place. It wasn't just a cultural practice for the early church, but rather a practical way of showing submission and humility. And 1 Corinthians 11, as you know, speaks to this in describing a covering for the Christian lady. And as a church, we agree that the Christian woman's covering symbolizes all of that. It's primarily a symbol of authority and headship order, but by extension, it's a reflection of modesty of the heart. And so I appreciate our church's guidelines on that, and I hope we keep both the principle and the symbol. And I don't like the idea, or I should say I reject the idea that the Christian woman's veiling is only a symbol. And so that it's only a symbol, so therefore it doesn't matter what size it is or what shape it is. That anything can still meet the definition of a symbol. I think of sometimes as like a flag. Or maybe just think of our national flag, the American flag. It's just a symbol. I was once running a little trenching an irrigation line in for a customer, and they asked me, the man came home from work as I was running this machine, and he asked me if I would run a trench from his flagpole in his front yard back to his house. He said he always wanted to be able to fly his flag at night, and he didn't want to do it without putting light on it. And so I trenched that in, and before I even had the trench dug, he'd come out of the garage with conduit. He had everything he needed he just never got the trench dug. And so that night, after dark, he sent me a video of his flag lighted, and it was flying in the breeze, and he was so happy. He finally got that accomplished. It was just a symbol. That's all it was. I think it was something a whole lot more to him. It was a whole lot more to him than whenever I take a postage stamp with an American flag on it and put it on an envelope. I have no feelings of patriotism when I do that, none at all. I'm actually about half ticked off at what that cost. But to him, it was something completely different. So it was a symbol, and I think that we agree it doesn't need to be a complete covering of the hair in the head, but it can't be something that's shrinking to a size where it becomes completely insignificant as a symbol. And so I think as men, we should encourage our sisters by showing appreciation for the size of the symbol and with keeping it within our guidelines. When our sisters place that covering on their heads, they're giving testimony to the fact that their allegiance lies with the kingdom of God, and that their heart and their life is in submission to the authority structure that God set up with a husband, a man over them. And as men, I think that should humble us. Our sisters are willing to show that level of submission to us and to God. Are we living up to that expression of modesty and submission? Are we living worthy of their level, of their expression of modesty? So our encouragement of this symbol for our sisters and our submission as men to Christ's authority is a meaningful way that we work together on modesty. I think another modesty principle has to be humility, not only in the heart, but that it comes out in an outward expression. And both scriptures that we looked at described how a lady is to fix or arrange her hair, and talks about not wearing flashy clothes or expensive clothes or accessories, just modest clothing. And both scriptures talk about an inner beauty and the attractiveness of a lady with an humble spirit. A lady that is attractive based not on her physical beauty and not on the beauty of her clothes or the accessories that she puts on, but rather in the spirit of her heart, rather in the way she presents herself, the way that she possesses a meek and quiet spirit, the way that she shows the word shamefacedness and sobriety. And that word shamefacedness is translated reserved. A Christian woman's attractiveness is based on a completely different set of values than our society. I hope our ladies never feel disadvantaged by that in any way. Modest clothing is not simply a layer that covers skin or nakedness. There's also the aspect of disguise or concealment. And the focus of dress and fashion in the world is by taking one of those two aspects and highlighting them for effect, for attraction. And the fashion world runs on those two principles, either by, an example of what I'm thinking of is women that wear leggings only as an outer garment. Does it cover the skin? Well, yes, it does. Does it conceal anything by definition of modesty? Well, it most certainly does not. Does it get the attention of men? Well, yes, it does. I'll actually bring in my next point because it's hard to separate this when we're talking about this, the modesty principle of covering shame. There are parts of our bodies that are beautifully created by God for specific purposes that were never meant to be exposed in public. And that's a principle that goes all the way back to the fall of man, when Adam and Eve sewed fig leaves together to cover themselves. When God was finished there with the curse and with their disbandment from the garden, he killed animals for their clothing, for the covering of their nakedness. And there's many examples from that point through the Old Testament of God's disapproval of man revealing nakedness. From the curse on Cain, the book of Isaiah brings it out in a couple different ways by depicting the righteous as someone that's covered in fine linen and the wicked as being someone that's exposed and naked. There's no denying that God created our entire body for his honor and glory, but parts of it are to be kept covered. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul uses the example of the human body to illustrate the brotherhood in all its different parts and likening that to the different members. And he uses some very discreet language to describe the parts of the body that are to be carefully covered. Here's an amplified version. And the parts we regard as less honorable are those we clothe with the greatest care. So we carefully protect those parts that should not be seen. Our society seems like it denies this fact by something they call self-expression and denying of the authority of God over the exposure of their bodies and without shame. And so from that, what they call self-expression, comes two types of flaunting of the body. One is by undress or exposure, and the other by covering in such a way that it actually highlights the very part that God wants concealed. And it seems like that there's possibly a third option that says if those things don't work for you and getting attention, then you could try something extra. And I think that's what Brother Jay was referencing about the hardware, that you can add on all kinds of jewelry, extras from colors, tattoos, whatever. So you have the exposure of the body, you have where it's covered, but it actually highlights the form, and then you have the extra that you can distract with. The Christian doesn't take any of those paths to draw attraction to themselves. We are not ourselves. We are God's. God owns us. He has an ownership of our body. This challenge of modesty in clothing is primarily carried out by the Christian lady, because while their bodies are created the same as the rest of the women of the world, they are called to a standard of holiness that precludes them from using their natural attraction to draw attention to themselves. And again, I hope our sisters don't see this challenge of modesty as a negative weight that holds them back from being noticed or holds them back from being appreciated, but rather that they would see it as a form of freedom from the rat race of women in society that have to use their bodies and their clothing to attract attention. And then they have the fear of attracting men with bad intentions, wrongful intentions. And yet they feel the demands to stay attractive, to stay appreciated, to get noticed in things like advancement in the workplace. And yet they have to be careful. They don't want to upset other women in the workplace that are vying for the attention of the same men that are in the same workplace that they are. And it's jealousy. And I don't know how women in society deal with that pressure day after day in the workplace, the demands of it. On Friday, I worked outside at just to the side of an entrance of a 6-story office building. I was there for several hours. There was just a constant stream of men and women going in and out of that entrance. The majority of the women were dressed very professionally. I would guess that they probably took an hour or more getting ready for work. From their hair to makeup to clothing to the footwear, I would not say modest, but I would say professional, very put together, if you know what I'm saying. The majority of men looked like they could have got dressed on the way to the car. The style for men today is apparently called untucked. And you have everything from untucked polos, untucked button down, and a pair of hey dudes, and they were just shuffling in the front door. And maybe it was casual Friday, I don't know, but there were still a few older, balding men that were wearing suit and tie and a pair of dress shoes. And I know that may be off topic, but the point is that there is a big disparity, even in society, between the dress expectations of a lady in the workplace and her male counterparts. And I have to think that it's driven by the pressures of female attraction. I just want to say that, sisters, I'm sure there's times in your experience that you must feel self-conscious in a simple, modest dress when you're out in public. Maybe there's situations that make you feel uncomfortable or awkward, but there is a freedom in modesty that I wonder if women in society don't actually long after, maybe even jealous of. And so I hope that you don't feel restrained or repressed, but rather if you can find yourself surrendered to God and possessing a spirit of humbleness, and know that you have an inner beauty, you can know this, that you are in the sight of God a great price. You are attractive. You do not need the attention and the approval of men other than your husband. Keep your physical beauty reserved for him. Physical beauty is fleeting. It's fading. Focus rather on developing a quiet inner beauty that surpasses any physical attributes. Lead a life of example in dress, of Christian beauty, Christian character that sets the standard for your daughters and other young ladies to aspire to. Work at keeping your dresses and your daughters' dresses within our guidelines in regards to skirt length and sleeve length, and with enough of fullness that it meets the definition of Christian modesty. And husbands, be attentive and engage when your wife asks you specific questions about her dress and how it looks and how it fits. You can be kind and courteous and reassuring and still speak to those kinds of issues. Modest dress is a team effort that I think godly husbands should care about. Question for young men. Are you possessing your vessel in sanctification, or are you subtly giving signals to the young ladies that you're more interested in their bodies than in their Christian character? If you're giving positive feedback and props to a young lady that is flaunting herself, you're signaling your approval and actually revealing your value system, and that it matches with the value system of the world. If you're engaging with lustful types of online media and video and enjoying the sinful pleasures of that, you're programming yourself to devalue the modesty efforts of Christian ladies. When you're purposefully showing off your physique, or maybe even carelessly showing off your physique around young ladies, you're sending them the message that you want them to notice your physical qualities more than your spiritual. That's a confusing and inconsistent message for our ladies. You're not honoring them and their efforts of modesty and humbleness when you're careless with your dress and appearance. Young ladies, don't buy into the lie that you need to expose yourself or accentuate your body in some way or add extra accessories to attract the attention of a young man. You which becometh women professing godliness and with the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit, you are enough. Neatness, cleanliness, tidiness, yes, by all means, yes. But you are enough. You don't need tight or short or revealing clothing. You don't need makeup. You don't need bling. You don't need extra hairdo stuff. You don't need glamour filters on your social media photos. When you present yourself with a godly reserve around men and with a meek and quiet spirit that honors Jesus Christ, you are completely within the will of God and you are enough. Rest in that. Leave the rest of the attraction in God's hands. Keep your standards high. You are a daughter of the King and you are attractive. Let's kneel for prayer. Our Father in heaven, I thank you for your goodness to us today, that we can come together as a body of believers and worship. And I thank you for all parts of this service today. And I just pray that you'd bless each one as they came. Bless each one that had a part. And Father, I just pray for those that couldn't be with us this morning for various reasons. Yes, we continue to pray for Sister Dora's mother and her health concerns. I just pray that you would work there and bring healing and restoration to her body.